All right, Evan, Lazar and Mariah Janos here, taking you up to the start of round 2 of the NFL draft. Evan, let's start with last night. The excitement of round 1 and the excitement or lack thereof, depending on your personal feelings, around the Patriots drafting Mac Jones and not having to move 1 inch for him. Your pre-draft prediction was spot on too. I mean, humble brag for you, I guess. In Trey Lance going to the 49ers and Mac Jones being available at 15 for the Patriots to pick. How do you feel about that prediction coming to fruition?
Yeah, that was a nice one for me. But I think the biggest thing is that I had sort of gotten this inclination that the media's opinion on Mac Jones was a lot more in line with what the NFL's opinion on him was, and that he wasn't worth a top 5 pick in the league eyes. Clearly, 3 quarterbacks went in the top 5, and none of them were Mac Jones. And I think if you're the Patriots, this is one of those things where the needing a quarterback in the future, needing a starter for long-term success, and the fact that Mac Jones was staring at them right in the eye, it was just too much to pass up, right? And maybe in years past, even last year, the Patriots had Jordan Love staring at them in the eyes at 23. They allowed him to go by, and they picked their guy Kyle Duggar a little bit later on. So this felt like a little bit of a different approach in that respect, that they kind of felt like, look, we need the quarterback. The quarterback's sitting there for us. We didn't have to trade up for him. We're getting him where we feel comfortable with getting him. Let's go for it. And as whether you like Justin Fields more than Mac Jones, obviously I'm a Fields over Jones type of guy as well, but it made too much sense once they were on the clock at 15 to not take the QB at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you were on the Zoom call last night after Mac Jones was selected, and then you were also at Gillette Stadium today where Mac Jones addressed the media in person for the first time. What were just your overall thoughts from the two, and also just the reactions from Bill Belichick and the Patriots front office?
Well, my overall impressions of Mac Jones, especially today at the press conference, look, you get drafted by the Patriots. They set up this stage on the field at Gillette Stadium. And the thing that he's looking at from the angle of the stage is the 6 banners hanging over the end zone there. And you have all this media. And granted, Alabama has a ton of media too. Alabama has a lot of attention on it as well as the football program. But this is the NFL, and this is Boston. Right. So this is two very different things than what you're getting down there in Tuscaloosa. And it didn't seem too big for him. Right. It didn't seem like he was overwhelmed. It didn't seem like he was, the moment was too big for him. The stage wasn't too big for him. It didn't say that the pressure was too big for him either. I didn't feel like technically speaking, as much as we can talk about Cam Newton kind of being the buffer here, Mac Jones is getting the successor to Tom Brady, right? And you can hear the wind, that crazy wind that was at Gillette Stadium there today. And I think the funny thing is he said, I hope it's, as my dog is just making all sorts of noise. He said that I hope that, it's not this windy all the time. And I hate to disappoint you, Mac, but it is that windy all the time at Gillette Stadium. And he mentioned that he grew up in the South and he used to practice on a beach all the time. And the wind reminded him of the beach and throwing on the beach. And he said that he would go out there on the beach in the elements, in the wind, in the rain, and throw to kind of get used to playing in those types of conditions. So definitely feels like a guy that just kind of chill, and just kind of had this attitude about him like, here I am. I'm here to play. I'm not here to sit around. I'm definitely here to play. I have the chip on my shoulder. I fell a little bit further in the draft than maybe I was expecting. I was a 3-star recruit coming out of high school. Everybody talked about Tua and Jalen Hurts being ahead of me, and I won the national championship. I got picked by the Patriots, and let's do it. I'm here.
Now, we saw in the draft room behind the scenes video that the Patriots released Bill Belichick checking with everyone to make sure they were good on the selection of Mac Jones. And we had heard prior to the draft that it was going to be more of a group decision of their approach to the draft. Do you believe everyone in that room was happy with this selection? They all seemed a little underwhelmed.
Yeah, well, so, look, on the one hand, I think those videos are often shot after the fact as sort of, it's acting, right? Where we're going to play out the scenario again, so we can go ahead and post it on Patriots.com and on the Twitter and all that kind of stuff and make everybody happy, right? But I think at the same time, the feeling that I got when Bill Belichick, especially when he came to the Zoom podium, if you will, after the draft last night, and he kind of sat there and said, well, we were on the clock at 15 and Mac Jones was there, so we made the pick. And it wasn't exactly like you hear some of these other coaches and they're like, we've done months and months of extensive work, and this was the target that we had going into the draft. I think the Patriots really sat back at 15 and kind of let the cards fall where they may fall. And they sort of had Mac Jones just fall in their laps. And is that, to some people, if you turn on 98.5 and you turn on the radio, they're going to kind of make this about, oh, well, did Bill really want the player? Is Bill really happy about having Mac Jones? Is this really the right decision if Belichick's not, gung-ho about the guy? It's not like he went out there last night and said, this is awesome, we got Mac Jones, right? We got the quarterback, we're all set. He didn't say any of those things. And I think that's a little bit of Bill just being Bill. And also, I think the board really just sort of fell the way that it fell, and the Patriots kind of felt like at that point it was the best matchup of value and need. And that's often how they approach the draft anyways.
Yes, this is true. All right, now I want to focus on tonight. Just looking at what's available, what we're expecting out of the Patriots. They could use a wide receiver. They could use a linebacker. They could use a cornerback. What do you expect for them to go for first? What's the first order of business? I personally want a wide receiver, but hey.
I know everybody wants the wide receiver. Look, they went the quarterback in the first round. So to me, it's really difficult to not think that Bill is now going to sort of go back to his roots of drafting a lineman, whether it's offensive or defensive lineman, or maybe drafting a linebacker and somebody in the front seven, or obviously in terms of, cornerbacks in the second round, or defensive backs, I should say, corners and safeties. Those are all positions that the Patriots always target on in the second round and day 2 of the draft as well. So that's the typical Belichick, would be a player on the line of scrimmage or a DB. That's what he normally does at this point in the draft, or in the draft in general. But when you draft a guy like Mac Jones at 15, who is not, let's face it, he's not Justin Fields. He's not Trey Lance. He's not Trevor Lawrence or Zach Wilson. He is somebody that is a little bit less physically capable than those guys. He's not as toolsy as those players are. You got to get him a lot of help so that he can just kind of distribute the football and be that point guard and be that facilitator. And that's where the wide receivers come into play, I think. And at some point in the next 2 days, I expect a running back as well, because if they're truly going to build this thing around Mac moving forward, they need to understand what kind of quarterback they just drafted. They drafted somebody that's a whole lot closer to Jimmy Garoppolo than he is to Patrick Mahomes, right? This is someone that's really going to stand in the pocket, deliver the ball on time, deliver the ball with good accuracy, but is someone that is going to need everybody else to be the athletes out there, and everybody else to kind of create after the catch and make those explosive plays happen so that he can just deliver the football. And that's where the wide receivers, I think, really come into play.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you just look at, obviously they went out and spent all this money on receivers in the offseason with the 2 tight ends, with Nelson Aguilar. And he is the top receiver with Julian Edelman out now. We're looking at more slot receivers that could be useful here. What are your thoughts in that second round? Do you think, we kind of touched on it a little bit, but get the wide receiver out of the way first, then address a linebacker in the third round or whatever? Or do you see them putting more packages together to accumulate more picks throughout the rest of the rounds?
Yeah, so I'll answer the question about the wide receivers first. There are 3 wide receivers, and I think we have the list that we can put up at some point that are still on the board right now as we enter day 2 that I think would be fantastic fits with Mac Jones. The 2 Moores, Elijah Moore and Rondell Moore, and Amari Rodgers from Clemson. These 3 guys are these undersized, speedy slot prototypes, right? The Tyreek Hills of the world. That's what these guys, that's the mold that these guys are targeting. To up the field receivers in terms of vertical speed, but most importantly, the ability to create with the ball in their hands. And I think a big part of that Alabama offense 20-25% of Mac Jones's production was throwing the ball to Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith on motions and different types of routes behind the line of scrimmage, and just getting the ball out to those guys and letting them run with it. That was a big chunk of what Alabama did really well. And that receiver, that kind of archetype, the Patriots don't currently have that guy on their roster that can do that sort of thing. It might have been Julian Edelman, but he retired. So they don't have that type of player. Nelson Aguilar is not that type of player. Maybe you can talk yourself into Jonnu Smith at tight end being a yak receiver and being sort of that space player. But really what I think is they need a guy that's got some speed that can create that ability there to, okay, we're going to bring him in motion out of the backfield. He's going to swing into the flat. And if Mac likes to read, if the corner doesn't sit down, we're just going to toss it out to him. There's 10 yards. That's the type of thing that they need right now out of that receiving core. So if they're going to draft a receiver, there is a bunch of those types of guys on day 2 of this draft. More as we can show you now, more Amari Rodgers, Rondale Moore. Those 3 guys are at the top of my board. But even if we go into day 2 or a little bit deeper, we can talk about guys like Dwayne Eskridge, or we can talk about somebody like a Jalen Darden, who I just missed my board, but it was someone that's somewhere in the 6 or 7 range if we had to stack up this 96 options. So there's so many good options there, I would say, in terms of what they can do at that wide receiver position at this point in the draft still, that I don't know. It's hard to pass it up. It really is hard to pass up that optic. And again, it's about Mac Jones, right? It's about the fact that you need to get as many playmakers around this type of quarterback in particular for him to be able to be great out there.
Right. Now I want to talk about heading into the 3rd round. Is that where you see it more of the investments for the future, 3rd round and on, kind of looking at who could be used in the years to come, not necessarily right away? We've talked about Dante Hightower. We don't know how much longer he's going to be around. We've talked about Stephon Gilmore and his expiring contract, even J.C. Jackson. So that's where we bring in the linebackers, the cornerbacks, or defensive backs, as you say. Would you reserve those later rounds for them?
So we kind of touched on it a little bit before about that gap from 46 to 96. And Mike Giardi of NFL Network had that report that the Patriots would like to bridge that 50-pick gap somehow, so they don't go 50 picks, because they feel like there's a lot of really good players, and there are. This is a draft that once you hit there's only 600 and something players in this draft. Usually it's double that. So once you hit outside the top 100, you're getting into a lot of players that maybe in other years the Patriots might not even have draftable grades on, right? It's a big drop off at that point. So packaging together some of those 4th round picks that they do have some extra 4ths, and Belichick talked about that last night. They have these extra 4th round picks. Maybe they can package some of those 4th round picks together and get back up into the top 100 to get a 3rd pick in the top 100, and then you can get a wide receiver, you can get a tackle, you can get a corner, and you can decide to hit those needs, or maybe it's a linebacker that they would prefer. But we've talked a lot about that 2-year window, right? When we get into the 2022 season, what are some of the holes on the team going to be? And corner and tackle are the ones that stick out like a sore thumb right now, where J.C. Jackson and Gilmore, both those guys could be on the outside looking in 2022. We don't know what's going to happen with Isaiah Wynn and Trent Brown. I do expect them to pick up Isaiah Wynn's option now that they didn't go tackle in the 1st round. I would think that they're going to hang on to him for one more year. But at the end of the day, those are the 2 spots, corner and tackle, that I think need to be addressed with a premium pick at some point, because they really could get into a position. And also, let's face it, if Stephon Gilmore or J.C. Jackson gets hurt, who's the next guy up, right? Is it Juwan Williams at this point? I'm not sure. So that's the next sort of thing for me I'm looking for. It'd be great for them to get a wide receiver and kind of blow this out of the park with Mac Jones. But at the same time, I think that those 2 positions, the depth there definitely needs to be bolstered here in the next couple of days.
All right. So real quick, before we let everyone go, you get 2 picks, a round 2 and a round 3. Who are 2 guys?
All right, so at 46, I want to keep it somewhat realistic. I don't want to. Elijah Moore, I think, might be the first name called here tonight, so I'm going to take him out of the running. I'm going to say Amari Rodgers from Clemson at 46 is a great pick for the Patriots just in terms of skill set, stylistic preference, all those types of things. And also what I was talking about earlier about getting that yak receiver. He reminds me a whole lot of Deebo Samuel in San Francisco, just one of those guys that runs hard, basically runs like a running back with the ball in his hands. And that's exactly what the Patriots need. At 96, I'm going tackle Spencer Brown from Northern Iowa. We talked about him in a video earlier, Mariah, the 6'8" tackle from Northern Iowa that has just absolutely freakish athleticism, like just kind of blew his pro day out of the water. And he's got a really good foundation right now of ability to pass protect. The issue that you see with him is that because he's 6'8", he's got a high center of gravity. So being able to get underneath people and push them off the ball is difficult when you're that tall. But in terms of pass protection and mirroring and pass rush, he certainly can do that sort of stuff. And he's a very good player blocking in space and blocking on the move because of his size and his athleticism. So those are the two guys that I would check off those boxes pretty easily right now. Then in the 4th round, maybe you can start talking about that cornerback position, and there'll be some options there. Maybe an Ambry Thomas or something like that from Michigan might still be around end of 3rd round, 4th round, where you can start getting back into that conversation.
All right, so now that we have covered all of our bases, there's nothing left to do but see what happens. We will be back on a few picks before the Patriots are on the clock, so be sure to join us right here.